Hey, hello guys, and welcome back to my YouTube show. And today, in my next childhood memories video, I'm going to talk about some of my memories. I remember watching some of the DreamWorks movies I watched on VHS on TV while I was living in Jersey. So this is going to be today's topic video, and from what I remember about them till now. So I had on VHS Shrek, The Road to El Dorado, Prince of Egypt, Joseph King of Dreams, and Ants. But I didn't watch Ants, Prince of Egypt, or Joseph King of Dreams that often. I didn't watch it that much because I didn't really follow the storyline until maybe 2018 or 2019, last year. That's when I really started to follow the storyline. So anyway, I'm going to go through them all. So I'm going to tell them what all the movies are about, and then I'm going to go on to part two. So anyway, so first movie I'm going to start off with Joseph King of Dreams, which was released in 2000, 2 years after the release of Prince of Egypt, which was released in 1998. And so Joseph King of Dreams takes place before the story of Moses and the Prince of Egypt, because that was before the Hebrews came into Egypt. And so the story is about Joseph, who was born to Rachel and Jacob. Because those were the two parents of Joseph, and he also had 11 other brothers, which were older than him. And then he was like he was his father's favorite son, and he was called the miracle child because he was his father's favorite. And so his father gave him a coat in which he could wear a coat which he could wear. And so his brothers became very jealous of him. And so the next day, he had a dream of the sheep. The sheep was killed by the wolves. And then his second dream was that he was standing above all his 11 brothers. And so the first dream actually came true, because if you remember earlier in the film, Joseph was out taking care of the sheep because that's what his brothers told him to do. But in the reality, they were just swimming. His 11 brothers were just swimming in the water, or in the lake, or whatever it was. And so his dream came true because the sheep was attacked by the wolf. And so Joseph's dreams came true. At least one of his dreams came true. But then his second dream was when he was standing above all his brothers on this hay. And so after that, his brothers planned to I wouldn't say kill him, because they would take it way too far. And so his brothers tore his coat, and they threw him down a hole, which was somewhere in this. It was one of this big caves and stuff like that. And so he was down there for some time, and his brothers didn't come back to rescue him. And so his brothers saw an Egyptian slave trader, and so he was sold into slavery. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, and so he was taken to Egypt, and his brothers gave Joseph's coat to his parents, Rachel and Jacob, and then his brothers told them that he was killed by wolves. But in the reality, he was actually sold in slavery and taken to Egypt. And so later on, Joseph was made a slave, and he was put in charge of cleaning the captain of the guards, no, the Pharaoh's captain of the guards house. And so that was basically Joseph's position that he held while he was there for some time. And for some time, he became trusted by the captain of the guard. And then one day, it was during the night when the Pharaoh's captain of the guard was coming to talk to him, and then in the reality, Joseph was thrown into the jail because the Pharaoh's captain of the guard believed that he was going to rape her or something, and so but in the reality, he didn't do anything, and so he was thrown into the jail, into the prison by the captain of the guards, by the Pharaoh's captain of the guard, and so he stayed there for some time. And then he told these two guys, there was one guy with long neck and a big fat guy, and he told him, Joseph told them that the the dream that you have in 3 days you will be free, and he told the other guy in 3 days you will be beheaded. And so those dreams actually came true to the prisoners. And so days later, the Pharaoh's captain of the guard came to Joseph in prison, and he told him that the Pharaoh has a dream that he can interpret and see what it means. And so they brought him to the palace where Joseph can explain his dream. And so the dream was about that there was a famine that was going to strike the Egypt, and so they had to do something about it. And so they said, you have to collect this grain and keep it to the people of Egypt. And they say, in 7 years you have to collect the grain in 7 years, and then there will be 7 years of abundance, which means there will be no grain on the fields. And so they kept it all stored in this this tank, and so they sold it to they gave it to the Egyptian people who were hungry. And then one day, and then also at that moment, it was Joseph's brothers came, and so Joseph was very scared to see them, because he remembered what he did to them, what he did to him while he was in Canaan. That's in Israel. That's where Joseph was born. And so Joseph had one of his brothers arrested. And then his wife told them that they didn't do anything wrong. And then Joseph told his wife that they were his brothers and they sold him into slavery. And then that's why he's in Egypt. And so later on, Joseph's brothers brought his parents and the people from Israel to Egypt. And so that's how the Prince of Egypt story happened 100 years after the Joseph story, which was the book of Genesis. And so anyway, I'm going to talk about the Prince of Egypt story. So the Prince of Egypt story starts with this Hebrews were enslaved in Egypt because the Pharaoh ordered all the Hebrews to be killed, Hebrew babies to be killed. That was one of the Pharaoh's orders. It's unknown who was the Pharaoh at the time. And so Moses' mother put him in a basket so he wouldn't be killed by the Egyptians. And so Moses ends up in the Pharaoh's temple, which there was the Pharaoh's wife, or the queen. And so the queen names the baby Moses. And so years later, he was raised by the Egyptian Pharaoh together with his adoptive brother Ramesses. He would become the Pharaoh after his father died, which was Seti the first. That was the name of the Pharaoh in the story, and the Pharaoh in ancient Egypt in real life. And so during that time, Moses discovers about his past, about how he was a Hebrew, but in the reality, he wasn't Egyptian, but he was dressed up as an Egyptian. He didn't have that hair. He just had they just gave him this this hair to wear, this fake Egyptian hair. And then he found out about his past, about his truth, about his family. And so it was one day where Moses left Egypt because he killed a man, and so he left Egypt. and then he went into exile so he could escape from being killed by the Pharaoh. So before his father knew about what happened. And so Moses leaves Egypt, and he goes to Israel. And that's where he meets his future wife, and that's where he would get the message from God and telling him that his people must be liberated from the bondages of Egypt. And so anyway, Moses accepts this, and he goes to Egypt so he can liberate his people from slavery. And so he told the Pharaoh multiple times. Now it was Pharaoh Ramesses, who was his adoptive brother, and he told him that the Hebrews need to be freed from the slavery. And so Ramses refused, and then Moses creates all this plagues and stuff, and telling him that his people must be free from slavery. And then there was one other plague, that was the 10th, the final plague, which was to take all the Egyptians' lives. Like, it was this killing all these Egyptian babies, all the firstborn children of Egypt. And so that's what happened. And so following this, Ramesses told his he used to be his adoptive brother, and Ramesses told Moses that he and his people have permission to leave Egypt. And so Moses and his Hebrews leave Egypt, and they go back to Israel. But one time, it was the departing of the Red Sea. That was where Ramesses tried to kill all the Hebrews, and so kill all the Hebrews. But then Moses stops Ramesses from killing all the Hebrews, and so Moses makes it to Israel with the Hebrews, and the Hebrews find peace there because they were free from after many years of slavery. And so at the end of the movie, Moses carries the 10th Commandments, which is basically laws in the Bible. I think it was a law in the Bible. So anyway, the third movie I'm going to talk about, The Road to El Dorado. So The Road to El Dorado is the story basically about these two con artists, Tulio and Miguel. They get their hands on a map after a gambling game because they won their hands on a map, and then they got on a ship. Well, actually, they were being chased by a bull, and so Miguel and Tulio end up in these two barrels because they jumped, and they landed in the barrels, which were full of water, and so they ended up on a ship which was Cortez was on, Herman Cortez. He was on the boat too. And so Cortez told them basically that you are going to be enslaved and be working on the sugar plantations of Cuba. And so Miguel and Tulio end up escaping with a horse named Altivo. And so they end up on an island in South America, and they went to start their journey to El Dorado. And so on their way there, they meet a young thief named Chell, who was the girl in the movie, if you remember. And so Chell joins on their plan to take the gold and head back to Spain. And so later on, they dress up and they sing "It's Tough to Be a God." That's one of the songs in the movie. And so days later, they stop the guy from killing as a citizen of El Dorado, and they told him this is not, and Miguel said this is not a proper tribute. And so later on, they had this little ball game, and they were also discussing about, in 3 days we need to leave with all the gold and stuff. And so later on, they got their hands on the gold, and they left the city of El Dorado. But then they crashed the boat. They crashed the boat into the pillars because they didn't want the gold anymore, because they didn't want it. And so Chell Michelle, Miguel, Tulio, and the horse and begin to leave El Dorado, and they begin to start their own adventure. And so I'm going to talk about Shrek next, but I'm going to talk about it in my next video, or which is part 2. And I'll see you guys in part 2.